Mark Thompson, an ambitious millionaire, built an empire at any cost, until a shocking truth about a secret son and his late ex-lover's family shattered his world and changed his life forever. Before we dive into the story, let's do what Sleepless in Seattle taught us. Share where you're listening from. Comment below. Mark Thompson's Italian leather shoes click against marble as he strides through the lobby of Thompson Davis Financial. The morning sun streams through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting his shadow across polished stone like a giant. Security guards nod as he passes, their eyes lowered in deference to the man whose name adorns the building. The executive elevator responds to his thumbprint, whisking him toward the penthouse offices on the 80th floor. Mark adjusts his Brioni tie, catching his reflection in the mirrored walls. At 45, he still cuts an imposing figure, salt and pepper hair, precisely styled, jaw clean-shaven, steel gray eyes sharp beneath designer frames. The suit costs more than most people make in a month, but in his world, appearance is currency. The elevator doors part to reveal his domain. Glass-walled offices stretch into the distance, already humming with the energy of junior analysts preparing for the market's opening bell. His assistant Julia rises from her desk, tablet in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson." Her voice carries the precise mix of efficiency and respect he demands. "Mr. Davis is waiting in the conference room." Mark's jaw tightens. Richard Davis, his former partner, current thorn in his side. "How long?" 20 minutes. He insisted on seeing you before the morning briefing. "Of course he did." Mark hands her his coat, a cashmere masterpiece that probably cost more than Julia's monthly rent. "Hold my calls unless it's the Singapore deal. And Julia?" He pauses, fixing her with a look that's made lesser employees quit on the spot. "If anyone else tries to ambush my schedule today, they answer to you first." "Understood, sir." Mark enters his corner office, taking a moment to survey the Manhattan skyline that stretches before him like a concrete kingdom. 60 stories below, yellow cabs crawl through morning traffic like insects. From up here, the city feels small, manageable, a game board where he moves pieces with calculated precision. His desk, a slab of African blackwood that could feed a family for a year, holds the usual morning briefs. Market projections, acquisition reports, the latest numbers from Asian trading. A single framed photo sits in the corner, half hidden behind a monitor. Mark in his early 30s, arm wrapped around a dark-haired woman whose smile reaches her eyes in a way his never quite does anymore. He turns the frame face down, a habit formed over years of refusing to acknowledge what he left behind. Success demands sacrifice. It's a mantra that's served him well, even if it leaves a bitter taste these days. The conference room door opens with practiced smoothness. Richard Davis looks up from his phone, his once boyish face now creased with ambition and too many late nights. "Mark." Richard stands, adjusting his own designer suit. Where Mark's clothing speaks of old money and refined taste, Richard screams new wealth. Too bright, too sharp, like he's still trying to prove he belongs. "Thanks for making time." "Cut the pleasantries, Richard. What couldn't wait for the board meeting?" Richard's smile doesn't waver, but something cold flickers in his eyes. They were friends once, back when Thompson Davis was just a shared dream in a cramped startup office. Now they circle each other like wolves, neither quite willing to strike first. The Chen Group is making noise about pulling out of the merger. Richard slides a folder across the polished table. "Their board wants additional guarantees we're not prepared to give." Mark doesn't touch the folder. The terms were negotiated months ago. They signed the preliminary agreements. Markets change. People get nervous. Richard leans forward, his voice dropping. "Unless we sweeten the pot, this whole deal could collapse, and we both know what that would do to our Q4 projections." The unspoken threat hangs between them. Thompson Davis needs this merger to work. The market has been volatile, and their competitors are circling, waiting for any sign of weakness. Mark's reputation, his entire empire, rests on maintaining the illusion of invincibility. "What are you suggesting?" Mark keeps his voice neutral, though his fingers press hard enough against the armrest to whiten his knuckles. Richard's smile widens fractionally. "I have a proposal, something to ease their concerns while protecting our interests." He pulls another document from his briefcase. "Take a look, but Mark?" He pauses at the door. "We need an answer by end of day. Time isn't on our side." The door clicks shut, leaving Mark alone with Richard's proposal and the growing certainty that whatever it contains will test the limits of what he's willing to do to maintain his position. He's built his empire on calculated risks and strategic compromises, each one justified by the end result. But lately the cost seems higher, the victories hollower. His phone buzzes, Julia reminding him of the morning briefing. Mark straightens his tie and pushes away from the table, leaving Richard's folder unopened. He'll deal with it later, after he's reminded everyone in this glass tower why Thompson Davis Financial answers to him first. The briefing room fills quickly, junior executives and department heads filing in with tablets and coffee cups. Mark stands at the head of the table, commanding attention without speaking. This is where he thrives, in rooms where power flows like currency, where every word carries weight. The Asian markets closed strong, he begins, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. But we're not here to celebrate yesterday's wins. Peterson, walk us through the Deutsche Bank numbers. The morning proceeds like a well-orchestrated dance. Mark leads, others follow, each step calculated to maintain the careful balance of fear and respect that keeps Thompson Davis at the top of the food chain. But Richard's words echo in his mind, a persistent reminder that even empires can crumble. By noon, Mark's calendar demands his presence at Le Bernardin, where clients expect to be wined and dined in exchange for their trust and their millions. He slides into a corner booth, ordering without looking at the menu. He's been coming here long enough to know what impresses without seeming ostentatious. The halibut is excellent today, Mr. Thompson. The sommelier appears with a bottle of Montrachet that costs more than most people's mortgage payments. Shall I decant this for the table? Mark nods, his attention already focused on the door as his lunch companions arrive. They're old money, third-generation wealth that views newcomers like him with barely concealed disdain, but they need his results, his aggressive strategies that keep their fortunes growing while their peers stagnate. Harrison. Mark stands, shaking hands with calculated firmness. Margaret, I trust the drive from Greenwich wasn't too tedious? Harrison Whitmore III settles his considerable bulk into the booth, his wife perching beside him like a bird. Traffic's always tedious, Thompson, but your track record makes it worth the trip. The dance begins again. Different partners, same steps. Mark outlines his latest investment strategy, painting pictures of growth and security that make the Whitmores lean forward in their seats. The wine flows, the halibut arrives, and by dessert, Harrison is ready to commit another $50 million to Mark's newest fund. You never disappoint, Thompson. Harrison signs the preliminary paperwork with a Mont Blanc pen that probably cost as much as the lunch. Though I must say, you seem distracted today. Everything all right at the firm? Mark's smile doesn't waver. Never better? The Chen merger is proceeding as planned. Margaret's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rise slightly. Really? I heard there were complications. Richard Davis was quite vocal about it at the club last weekend. The wine turns sour in Mark's mouth. Of course, Richard is talking, sowing seeds of doubt among their most valued clients. It's a power play, subtle but effective. Mark makes a mental note to revoke Richard's club membership at the first opportunity. Richard's enthusiasm sometimes exceeds his discretion, Mark says smoothly. I assure you, everything is under control. But as he watches the Whitmores leave, Mark feels the weight of Richard's folder like a stone in his briefcase. The game is changing, the stakes rising, and he's no longer certain he knows all the players. The afternoon stretches into evening, a blur of meetings and calls that keep him tethered to his desk while the sun sets over Manhattan. Junior analysts scurry past his office, eager to escape before his notorious work ethic forces them to stay later. By 8, the floor is nearly empty. Mark loosens his tie, Richard's proposal finally open before him. The terms are aggressive, bordering on predatory. The Chen Group's concerns would disappear, yes, but the collateral damage to smaller businesses in their portfolio would be catastrophic. 10 years ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. Business is war, and casualties are inevitable. But something stops him now, a nagging doubt that feels suspiciously like conscience. His eyes drift to the face-down photo frame. With everyone gone, he allows himself to turn it over. Sarah's smile hits him like a physical blow, reminding him of a time when success meant more than quarterly reports and market share. The memory surfaces unbidden. Sarah in his old apartment, tears streaming down her face as she tried to tell him something important. But he had a meeting, a deal that couldn't wait, and whatever she needed to say seemed less crucial than making partner before 40. He was wrong. The realization sits heavy in his chest, a truth he spent years avoiding. Mark reaches for his phone, scrolling through emails to distract himself from uncomfortable thoughts. A new message catches his eye, the sender's name like a ghost from the past. Sarah Martinez wants to meet. Mark stares at the screen, his carefully ordered world suddenly tilting on its axis. Sarah's message is brief, urgent. She needs to see him, tomorrow if possible. Something about David, the man she married after Mark chose his career over their future. His finger hovers over the delete button. Whatever Sarah wants, it can't be good for the careful balance he's maintained since their paths diverged. But the image of her tears that last day haunts him, and before he can talk himself out of it, he types a reply. Coffee tomorrow, 10 a.m., the place on Sullivan Street. The response comes quickly. Thank you, I'll be there. Mark sits back, aware that he's just added another variable to an already unstable equation. Between Richard's power play, the Chen merger, and now Sarah's unexpected reappearance, the control he's built his life around feels increasingly tenuous. Outside his window, Manhattan glitters like a jewel box, full of promises and prices. Mark Thompson has paid every price asked of him to reach these heights. Tomorrow, he'll learn just how much more it might cost him to stay there. The coffee shop on Sullivan Street is deliberately downscale, the kind of place that would never appear in his expense reports. Mark arrives early, choosing a corner table that lets him watch the door while keeping his back to the wall. Old habits die hard. Sarah enters exactly on time, and Mark's carefully constructed world shifts again. She's older, yes, but grace has replaced the youthful energy he remembers. Grief has left shadows under her eyes, but she carries herself with quiet dignity that makes his power suits and corner office feel suddenly hollow. Mark. She slides into the chair across from him, setting down a cup of tea she must have ordered at the counter. Thank you for meeting me. He nods, studying her face for clues about why she's disrupted 15 years of careful silence. Sarah, I was sorry to hear about David. Were you? There's no accusation in her voice, just tired curiosity. I didn't think you kept track of us after everything. I have people who keep me informed. It sounds cold, even to his ears. Heart attack, wasn't it? Sarah's fingers tighten around her cup. Yes, very sudden. He was working late at the restaurant. We'd finally saved enough to expand, and she trails off, collecting herself. But that's not why I asked to meet. Mark leans back, adopting the pose that makes junior executives squirm. Why did you? Because... Sarah glances toward the door, and something in her expression makes Mark turn to look. A boy stands in the doorway, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with dark hair and familiar gray eyes that widen as he spots Sarah. He weaves through the tables with the determined focus of youth, and Mark feels something twist in his chest as the pieces start falling into place. Mom. The boy reaches their table, then stops short at the sight of Mark. Oh, hi. Sarah's smile is gentle but strained. Ethan, honey, this is Mark. Remember how I told you we needed to meet someone important today? Mark's world narrows to the boy's face, to eyes that mirror his own, to features that echo photos from his own childhood. The coffee turns to acid in his stomach as 15 years of carefully maintained control crumbles in an instant. He's mine. It's not a question. Sarah nods, one hand protectively on Ethan's shoulder. I tried to tell you that last day, but you had a meeting that couldn't wait, and then I ended things. Mark's voice sounds distant to his own ears. You were trying to tell me you were pregnant. Yes. The single word carries the weight of 15 years of choices and consequences. Mark stares at his son, and feels the ground shifting beneath his feet. Everything he's built, every sacrifice he's justified, suddenly seems meaningless in the face of this small boy with his serious expression. Why now? He forces the words past the tightness in his throat. After all this time, why tell me now? Sarah's eyes fill with tears she refuses to let fall. Because David's gone, and I'm drowning in medical bills and funeral costs. Because the restaurant we built is barely staying afloat. Because... She takes a shaky breath. Because Ethan deserves to know his father, and I can't keep pretending the past doesn't exist. Mark reaches for his checkbook, the gesture as automatic as breathing. How much do you need? I can have it transferred. No. Sarah's voice carries the same steel he remembers from their last fight. I didn't come here for your money, Mark. I came because our son needs his father, not your checkbook. The words hit him like a physical blow. Mark looks at Ethan again, seeing past the surface resemblance to the quiet intelligence in the boy's expression. This child represents everything he's sacrificed for success, every human connection he's severed in pursuit of power. I don't. Mark stops, for once unsure of his words. I don't know how to be a father. Neither did David, Sarah says softly. But he learned, because he wanted to. The unspoken question hangs between them. What does Mark want? His phone buzzes, probably Julia, reminding him of afternoon meetings, of Richard's deadline, of all the carefully scheduled obligations that define his existence. Mark Thompson has built an empire on absolute control, on never letting emotion cloud his judgment. But as he looks at his son, at this piece of himself he never knew existed, he realizes that some things can't be controlled, only embraced or lost forever. The choice, as always, is his to make. I can help, Mark says, reaching for his briefcase. Set up a trust fund for Ethan. Take care of any outstanding debts. Stop! Sarah's voice cuts through his practiced financial solutions. I didn't come here to negotiate a settlement, Mark. This isn't a hostile takeover or a merger deal. She looks at Ethan, who has pulled out a worn paperback and is reading quietly beside her. He's your son, not an obligation you can satisfy with a check. Mark's jaw tightens. Then what do you want from me? Want? Sarah's laugh holds no humor. I want you to understand that being a father means showing up. It means parent-teacher conferences and little league games and helping with homework. David knew that. He chose that every single day. The comparison stings more than Mark expects. He glances at his phone. 3 missed calls from Julia, an urgent email from Richard about the Chen deal. His carefully structured world demands his attention, but for once, the pull feels more like a trap than a privilege. I have responsibilities, he says, but the words sound hollow even to him. Commitments That's exactly what you said 15 years ago. Sarah gathers her purse, touching Ethan's shoulder gently. Come on, honey. We should go. Ethan looks up, his gray eyes, Mark's eyes, filled with quiet curiosity. Mom says you work in a really tall building. Can I see it sometime? The simple question hits Mark harder than any boardroom confrontation. His child sees him not as a titan of Wall Street or a ruthless businessman, but simply as someone whose building he wants to visit. Mark swallows hard. Yes, you can see it. If that's okay with your mother. Sarah studies him for a long moment. That depends on you, Mark. Are you asking as Mark Thompson, CEO, looking to add occasional father to his schedule, or as someone who's ready to actually be part of his son's life? Mark looks between them. Sarah, who once knew him better than anyone, and Ethan, who represents a future he never allowed himself to imagine. His phone buzzes again, but for the first time in 15 years, he lets it ring. Some choices, once made, reshape everything that follows. Mark Thompson built an empire on knowing which risks to take, which battles to fight. But as he watches his son pack away his book with careful precision, he realizes that his greatest risk might be refusing to change at all. Mark Thompson stares at the quarterly projections without seeing them, his mind replaying the scene at the coffee shop for the 100th time. Ethan's gray eyes, his eyes, haunt him, along with Sarah's quiet dignity in the face of loss. The numbers on his screen blur and shift, refusing to hold meaning. His phone chirps. Another message from Sarah, updating him on Ethan's upcoming parent-teacher conference. He swipes it away, a familiar surge of resentment rising in his throat. 15 years. She kept this from him for 15 years, and now she expects him to just... Mr. Thompson? Julia hovers in his doorway, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. The Bensons are here for their 10 o'clock. Mark blinks, his carefully ordered world snapping back into focus. The Bensons. Third-generation fortune, old enough to remember when the Vanderbilts were considered new money. He can't afford distractions, not with their portfolio hanging in the balance. Send them in. He straightens his tie, donning the mask of confident competence that served him so well. And Julia? Hold all calls unless it's Richard with the Chen numbers. The Bensons sweep into his office like royalty visiting the colonies. Maxwell Benson III's handshake is just firm enough to establish dominance without seeming crass about it. His wife, Catherine, perches on the edge of her chair as if afraid of contamination by proximity to new money. Thompson. Maxwell's voice carries the precise inflection that comes from 8 generations of prep schools. Quarterly review time already? Seems like we just did this dance. Mark forces a smile, reaching for the portfolio analysis he reviewed last night, or meant to review, before Sarah's message sent him down another spiral of what-ifs and might-have-beens. Your positions have shown remarkable resilience despite market volatility, he begins, but the words feel hollow, disconnected. In his mind, Ethan's face overlays Maxwell's, those familiar gray eyes asking questions. Mark doesn't know how to answer. Thompson? Maxwell's voice sharpens. Are you even listening to yourself? You just contradicted your own analysis from 30 seconds ago. Mark glances down at the report, realizing with dawning horror that he's been reading the wrong quarter's numbers. Amateur hour, the kind of mistake that gets junior analysts fired. My apologies. He shuffles papers, buying time. If we look at the adjusted figures, what we're looking at, Catherine cuts in, is a disturbing lack of attention to detail. Her perfectly manicured nails tap against the armrest. Maxwell, darling, perhaps we should revisit that offer from Goldman Sachs. The words hit Mark like a physical blow. The Benson account represents over $50 million in managed assets. Losing them would be catastrophic, not just financially, but as a signal to other old money clients that Thompson Davis is slipping. Mrs. Benson, he starts, but Catherine is already rising, smoothing her Chanel suit with practiced precision. We'll have our people call your people, Maxwell says, managing to make the cliché sound like a death sentence. Good day, Thompson. The door clicks shut behind them with the finality of a coffin lid. Mark slumps in his chair, the magnitude of his failure pressing against his chest like a weight. Through the glass walls of his office, he can see Julia already typing what he assumes is damage control. His phone buzzes again. Sarah, with a photo of Ethan proudly holding up a math test marked with a red A+. The boy's smile is pure and unguarded, everything Mark hasn't been in decades. Mr. Thompson? Julia's voice crackles through the intercom. Mr. Gallagher would like to see you. Immediately. Of course he would. News travels fast in their world, especially bad news. Mark straightens his tie again, a gesture that feels increasingly like armor against a world spinning out of his control. Thomas Gallagher's office occupies the top floor of Thompson Davis Financial, a testament to old-school power that makes Mark's modern glass cube feel like a servant's quarters. The man himself stands at the window, hands clasped behind his back as he surveys his domain. Sit down, Mark. Gallagher doesn't turn around. Want to tell me what happened with the Bensons? It was a momentary lapse, Mark says, hearing the weakness in his own excuse. I can fix it. I'll call Maxwell myself, smooth things over. Like you smoothed things over with the Chen Group? Gallagher turns now, his face carved with the kind of authority that comes from surviving 3 market crashes and 2 divorces. Or how about the Williams account last week? The botched trade that cost us 7 figures? Mark's throat tightens. He hadn't realized anyone had noticed that particular mistake, buried as it was in end-of-day trading. I've had some personal matters. We all have personal matters. Gallagher settles into his chair, the leather creaking like a warning. The difference is, most of us don't let them interfere with $50 million accounts. It won't happen again. No, Gallagher agrees, it won't. Because you're going to sort out whatever's got you so distracted, or you're going to find yourself with plenty of free time to deal with your personal matters. Permanently. The threat hangs in the air between them, clear as a noose. Mark thinks of Ethan's photo, of that bright smile untouched by the weight of expectations and consequences. How long, he asks. 2 weeks. Gallagher's tone allows no negotiation. Fix whatever's broken, Mark, or don't bother coming back. The elevator ride down feels longer than usual, each floor marking another step in Mark's descent from certainty into chaos. His phone buzzes yet again. Sarah, asking if he's free to meet about Ethan's upcoming school project. Something shifts in Mark's chest, a recognition that he can't keep pretending these worlds won't collide. With a decisiveness that served him well in simpler choices, he texts Sarah back. I'll come by tonight. The drive to Queens feels like crossing into another universe. Mark's Tesla looks obscenely out of place among the modest cars and worn buildings. He double-checks the address Sarah sent, half hoping he's made a mistake. But no, this is it. A pre-war walk-up with peeling paint and a security door that's seen better decades. Mark clutches his briefcase, the check inside burning like a brand. He'll fix this the only way he knows how, with money and clean boundaries. Sarah answers his knock wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The contrast with his bespoke suit feels deliberate, though he knows it isn't. You came. She sounds surprised, stepping back to let him in. Ethan's in his room, working on his science project. The apartment is small but meticulously kept, with the kind of wear that speaks of care rather than neglect. Children's artwork decorates the walls. Ethan's, Mark assumes, each piece signed with careful pride. I brought something. Mark reaches for his briefcase, but Sarah's expression stops him. If that's a check, you can take it right back to Manhattan with you. You need help, he says, frustration edging his voice. Let me do this my way. Your way? Sarah's laugh holds no humor. Your way is throwing money at problems until they go away. That worked fine when it was just us, Mark. It's not going to work with your son. As if summoned by her words, a small figure appears in the hallway. Ethan clutches a model solar system, projects clearly made from painted styrofoam balls and wire. Mom? His eyes dart between them. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, honey. Sarah's voice softens. Remember I told you Mark might stop by? Do you want to show him your science project? Ethan approaches cautiously, holding out his creation. We're learning about the planets. I made Neptune blue because it's mostly ice. Mark stares at the wobbly planets, their orbits slightly uneven but clearly made with intense concentration. It's very accurate, he manages, the words feeling inadequate. Ethan's face lights up. Really? Do you know about space stuff? Some, Mark admits, thinking of his own childhood fascination with astronomy, long buried under spreadsheets and market analyses. Did you know Neptune has 14 moons? 14? Ethan's eyes widen. But I only put one on my model. That's okay, Mark finds himself saying. The important ones are Triton and Nereid. The rest are pretty small. Can you tell me about them? Ethan settles cross-legged on the floor and assessed solar system balanced carefully in his lap. Mrs. Rodriguez says we get extra credit if we know interesting facts. Mark glances at his watch automatically, then catches Sarah's knowing look. With deliberate care, he loosens his tie and lowers himself to sit on the worn carpet. Well, he begins, Triton is special because it orbits backwards. Time slips away as Mark explains retrograde orbits and gravitational capture to his son. Ethan absorbs each detail with intense focus, asking questions that reveal a sharp mind behind his shy demeanor. When Sarah announces it's time for dinner, Mark is surprised to find his jacket draped over a chair, his shoes kicked off somewhere during their impromptu astronomy lesson. You should stay, Ethan says, gathering his planets carefully. Mom made lasagna. It's not as good as when Dad made it, but it's still pretty good. The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. David's absence hangs heavy in the room, a reminder of all the years Mark missed, all the moments someone else stepped up to be the father he should have been. I have meetings, he starts to say, but the lie tastes bitter. Actually, lasagna sounds good. If that's okay? Sarah studies him for a long moment before nodding. Set another place, Ethan. Mark's staying for dinner. The meal is simple but good, worlds away from the expense account dinners that usually fill Mark's evenings. Ethan chatters about school and friends, periodically asking Mark questions about space that suggest he's been storing them up. Dad used to read me books about astronauts, Ethan says suddenly, pushing his garlic bread around his plate. Before he got sick. Sarah reaches for her son's hand, but Ethan continues, his eyes fixed on Mark. Do you like books about space too? Mark thinks of his own father, of nights spent poring over star charts and dreaming of exploration before reality and ambition took over. I used to, he admits. Maybe we could find some new ones to read together? The hope in Ethan's face makes something crack in Mark's carefully constructed walls. This child, his child, doesn't care about quarterly projections or merger deals. He just wants someone to share his enthusiasm for Neptune's moons and backward orbiting satellites. Later, after Ethan is in bed and Sarah is walking him to the door, Mark pulls out the check he brought. Sarah. I told you we don't want your money. I know. He tears the check in half, then quarters. But I need to be part of his life. The right way. If you'll let me. Sarah takes the torn pieces of paper, a small smile playing at her lips. That depends on you, Mark. Are you ready to show up? Really show up? He thinks of Gallagher's ultimatum, of the Benson account slipping away, of all the carefully built success that suddenly feels hollow in the face of Ethan's unguarded smile. I'm learning, he says finally, if you'll both be patient with me. That's a start. Sarah opens the door. Ethan has a presentation at school next week. About the solar system. What time? 2:00, during trading hours. The old Mark would have dismissed it immediately. Markets don't close for school presentations. But the man who spent an hour explaining Neptune's moons to his son finds himself nodding. I'll be there. The drive back to Manhattan feels different, the city's glittering skyline less like a crown and more like a cage. Mark's phone is full of missed calls from Richard, yet urgent messages about the Chen deal that would have consumed him just days ago. Instead, he finds himself thinking about astronomy books and backward orbiting moons, about second chances that come disguised as complications. His empire may be built on absolute control, but for the first time in decades, Mark Thompson is willing to let something else take priority. The office next morning hums with its usual energy, but Mark notices things he's overlooked before. The dark circles under Julia's eyes, the family photos on analyst desks, the small signs of lives existing beyond quarterly reports and market forecasts. Richard ambushes him before he reaches his office, tablet in hand and shark smile in place. The Chen deal is ready to move, Richard says without preamble. I need your sign-off by end of day. Mark takes the tablet, scanning numbers that would have barely registered days ago. Now, details jump out at him, discrepancies in valuations, aggressive terms buried in subclauses. These projections, he says slowly, they seem optimistic. Richard's smile doesn't waver. Markets are all about optimism, Mark. You taught me that. Did he? Mark tries to remember the hungry young associate he took under his wing, wondering when ambition curdled into something darker. I need time to review this properly. Time. Richard's laugh holds an edge. Since when do you need time? The Mark Thompson I know would have signed this already. The Mark Thompson Richard knows would have. But that Mark hadn't spent last night explaining planetary orbits to his son, hadn't seen the trust in Ethan's eyes when he asked about space books. Things change, Mark says, handing back the tablet. Have the full documentation on my desk by noon, all of it. Richard's smile slips for just a moment. Mark, all of it, Richard. Every page, every appendix, every model. Mark turns away, not waiting for a response. His office feels different too. The glass walls less like a symbol of transparency and more like an aquarium where predators circle. He's halfway through his morning emails when Julia appears, her usual efficiency tinged with concern. Sir, the Singapore conference call is in 10 minutes, but you also have that school thing. Cancel Singapore, Mark says, surprising them both. And clear my afternoon. I have a solar system presentation to attend. Julia blinks, then makes a note on her tablet. Yes, sir. And the Chen documentation Mr. Davis just had delivered? Mark glances at the stack of folders now occupying his desk. Hold all calls. I need to read every word. The morning passes in a blur of fine print and financial models. Mark's head pounds as patterns emerge, subtle at first, then increasingly blatant. Richard hasn't just been aggressive, he's been reckless, possibly fraudulent. A small business notice catches his eye, a family restaurant leveraged as collateral in a side deal. The owner's name makes his blood run cold, David Martinez. Mark's phone buzzes with a text from Sarah. Ethan's really excited you're coming today. The pieces click together with sickening clarity. Richard's optimistic projections, the targeted pressure on small businesses, David's sudden heart attack. A sharp knock interrupts his thoughts. Richard stands in the doorway, smile gone. You're digging, he says flatly. Stop. Mark looks at his former protege, seeing him clearly for the first time. What did you do, Richard? What you taught me to do. Win at any cost. Richard steps closer, lowering his voice. The Chen deal goes through today. Don't make me remind the board about your recent performance issues. The threat hangs between them, but Mark barely hears it. His mind is on David Martinez's restaurant, on the stress that likely triggered his fatal heart attack, on the family left behind. Get out of my office. Richard's smile returns, sharp as a blade. Think carefully, Mark. Some decisions can't be undone. The door closes behind him with a soft click. Mark stares at the documents scattered across his desk, each page another piece of evidence in a puzzle he should have solved years ago. His phone buzzes again, Sarah, reminding him of the time. Mark looks at his reflection in the glass walls, seeing a man caught between worlds. The expensive suit feels like a costume now, armor against truths he can't ignore. The drive to Ethan's school takes 30 minutes, each mile carrying him further from the familiar territory of boardrooms and balance sheets. He parks between minivans and sensible sedans, his Tesla an alien spacecraft among working-class vessels. The elementary school buzzes with the controlled chaos of parent gatherings. Mark follows signs to the auditorium, feeling oversized and out of place among the casual clothes and easy familiarity of other parents. Sarah waves from a row near the front. She's saved him a seat, though her surprised smile suggests she wasn't entirely sure he'd come. "You made it," she whispers as he slides in beside her. "I said I would." The words come out defensive, but Sarah just nods. The lights dim and Ethan's class files onto the stage. Mark spots his son immediately, back straight, solar system held carefully in front of him. Their eyes meet across the distance, and Ethan's face lights up with a smile that makes Mark's chest ache. One by one, students present their projects. Mark finds himself leaning forward as Ethan steps to the microphone, his small voice clear and confident. "Neptune is the 8th planet from the sun," Ethan begins. "It has 14 moons, but the most important ones are Triton and Nereid." Mark watches his son explain retrograde orbits to his classmates, using the same words Mark used at dinner. Ethan's enthusiasm is infectious, his knowledge extending beyond what Mark shared. This child, this brilliant boy who sees wonder in the universe, is his son. His phone vibrates in his pocket, probably Richard, demanding decisions Mark no longer wants to make. He silences it without looking, focused entirely on Ethan's moment in the spotlight. After the presentations, Ethan runs to them, clutching his model and a certificate for outstanding scientific knowledge. "Did you see?" he asks Mark, bouncing on his toes. "I remembered everything about the moons." "You were amazing," Mark says, meaning it. "Better than most presentations I see at work." Ethan beams, then glances at his solar system with sudden concern. "Neptune's ring got a little bent. Can you help me fix it?" "Of course." The answer comes without hesitation. "We can work on it together." Back at the office, Richard paces like a caged animal. Reports of Mark's absence have spread, feeding rumors and speculation. The Chen deal hangs by a thread, along with Richard's carefully constructed schemes. Julia intercepts Mark as he returns, her tablet clutched like a shield. "Sir, the board called an emergency meeting. Mr. Davis, he's been making statements." "I'm sure he has." Mark straightens his tie, armor back in place. Time to face the music. The boardroom falls silent as Mark enters. Richard stands at the head of the table, mid-presentation. Graphs and projections fill the screens behind him, Mark's recent mistakes cataloged in high-resolution detail. "How kind of you to join us," Richard says, smile sharp as broken glass. "I was just explaining to the board how your personal issues have begun affecting the firm's performance." Mark takes his seat, aware of the weight of scrutiny from every direction. The old Mark would have fought back immediately, defending his territory with practiced aggression. Instead, he thinks of Ethan explaining Neptune's moons, of the pride in his son's voice as he shared knowledge freely, without agenda or guile. "You're right," Mark says quietly, shocking the room into deeper silence. "My behavior has been erratic lately. My priorities have shifted." He meets Richard's eyes steadily, which is why I've been taking a closer look at certain deals, including yours. Color drains from Richard's face. "Mark." "The Chen documentation," Mark continues, laying a thick folder on the table, "makes for interesting reading, especially the parts about targeted acquisitions of small businesses, like a certain family restaurant that recently lost its owner to a stress-induced heart attack." The boardroom erupts in murmurs. Richard's smile vanishes completely. "You wouldn't," he hisses. "You'd go down too. Everything I did, I learned from you." "Yes," Mark agrees, the admission heavy with truth. "You did. That's why it has to stop." He turns to address the board directly. "I've discovered evidence of systematic fraud and predatory practices in our recent deals. I take full responsibility for not catching this sooner. My recommendation is an immediate internal audit, starting with the Chen acquisition. This is absurd, Richard sputters. He's trying to deflect from his own failures, his illegitimate child, his affair with a dead man's wife. My son, Mark interrupts, voice cutting through Richard's desperate accusations, is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And Sarah Martinez is a widow trying to keep her family's dreams alive after your schemes helped destroy them. The chairman clears his throat. These are serious allegations, Mr. Thompson. On both sides. Perhaps a leave of absence would be appropriate while we investigate? Mark nods, already reaching for his phone. He has a solar system to repair. The next morning, the consequences of his boardroom revelation ripple through Thompson Davis like aftershocks. Mark arrives early, before the usual crowd of analysts and traders, to dig deeper into the documents Richard tried to bury. The pattern emerges with sickening clarity. While Mark was distracted by Sarah's revelation and his growing relationship with Ethan, Richard had been systematically targeting vulnerable businesses. David's restaurant wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a calculated strategy to pressure smaller operations into desperate positions. Julia appears in his doorway, her usual professional mask cracking slightly. Sir, I found those files you requested, the ones about the subsidiary acquisitions. Mark takes the folder, his stomach turning as he reads. Richard hadn't just been aggressive, he'd been methodical in his destruction. Small businesses were acquired through shell companies, their assets stripped, their owners left with nothing but debt and broken dreams. The names blur together. Chen Family Imports, Martinez Family Restaurant, Wilson's Hardware. Each one a family legacy systematically dismantled while Mark was too wrapped up in his own crisis to notice. His phone buzzes, Sarah again. Ethan's teacher called. He got into a fight at lunch. Mark stares at the message, worlds colliding. He should be focused on damage control at the firm, on protecting what's left of his career. Instead, he finds himself texting back, on my way. The school's administrative office feels smaller than yesterday's auditorium. Ethan sits in an oversized chair, eyes red but chin lifted defiantly. Sarah arrives moments after Mark, her work clothes suggesting she rushed from her shift at the diner where she's been picking up extra hours. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson? The principal begins, then catches herself at Sarah's slight flinch. Miss Martinez and Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming so quickly. Ethan's story comes out in pieces. Another boy had been making fun of him for suddenly having a father show up at school. He said you were only pretending to care about my project, Ethan says, voice small but steady. That you disappear again like before. Mark's chest tightens. He recognizes the fear in his son's voice, the same fear of abandonment he spent a lifetime inflicting on others. Fighting isn't the answer, Sarah says firmly, but her hand on Ethan's shoulder is gentle. But neither is letting people say cruel things about your family. Family. The word echoes in Mark's head as they leave the principal's office. Ethan suspended for the rest of the day, but otherwise intact. I can take him, Mark offers, surprising himself, if you need to get back to work. Sarah studies him for a moment. You don't have a board meeting to save your career? Some things are more important. The words feel foreign on his tongue, but true. Back at his apartment, a space that suddenly feels too large, too empty, Mark watches Ethan explore with cautious curiosity. The boy gravitates toward Mark's home office, where a telescope sits unused by the window. You really do like space stuff, Ethan says, touching the telescope gently. I used to love it. Mark joins him at the window. Sometimes I'd stay up all night just watching the stars. Can we do that sometime? Watch stars together? The simple request carries the weight of possibility, of choices not yet made, of paths not yet taken. Mark's phone buzzes again. Julia this time. Sir, Mr. Davis is removing files from the server. IT needs authorization to stop him. Do it. Mark texts back. Then to Ethan, yes, we can watch the stars anytime you want. That evening, after Sarah picks up Ethan, Mark returns to the office. The place feels different now, its gleaming surfaces revealing hairline cracks he'd never noticed before. He finds Linda Carlson's file buried in Richard's records. Another small business owner, another life about to be upended by their machinations. Her coffee shop stands in the way of a development deal, one that Richard had fast-tracked while Mark was discovering fatherhood. The photos in her business proposal show a warmly lit space filled with mismatched furniture and local art. The kind of place David might have loved, where community meant more than quarterly earnings. Mark makes a call. "Miss Carlson, my name is Mark Thompson. We need to talk about your lease situation." He pauses, thinking of Ethan's defiant stance in the principal's office. "I think it's time someone stood up to the bullies." The sun sets over Manhattan, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and shadow. Mark stands at his window, watching the city transform. His phone fills with messages, from the board, from legal, from Richard's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. He answers only one, Sarah's text about Ethan asking to bring his telescope to Mark's apartment this weekend. "Clear skies forecasted," he replies, "perfect for stargazing." In the reflection of his office window, Mark Thompson sees a man at a crossroads. Behind him lies an empire built on calculated cruelty and precise control. Ahead, a path he's only beginning to understand, marked by parent-teacher conferences and shared wonder at the night sky. His phone rings, the board chairman, probably calling to formalize his leave of absence. For the first time in his career, Mark Thompson lets it go to voicemail. He has more important things to focus on, like learning the names of Neptune's other 12 moons, just in case Ethan asks. The baseball arcs through the autumn air, a perfect spiral against the fading sky. Mark Thompson watches it sail past his outstretched fingers, thudding into the grass of Central Park. His Italian leather shoes, still polished to a mirror shine, crush delicate blades as he retrieves the ball. "Sorry." Ethan's voice carries across the lawn, genuine concern in his young face. "I threw it too high." "It's fine." Mark tosses the ball back, careful to keep his throw gentle. His shoulder protests. Too many hours hunched over spreadsheets. Too few moments like this. "Good arm, though. You play Little League?" "David." Ethan stops, his small face clouding. "I mean, Dad used to practice with me every Sunday." "Before." The words hang in the crisp October air. Mark's chest tightens at the mention of David, at the easy way Ethan says Dad. It's a title Mark hasn't earned, may never earn, but something pulls him forward, makes him close the distance between them. "Show me your grip." He crouches beside his son, the phrase still feels foreign in his mind, and demonstrates the proper finger placement across the seams. "Like this. It helps with control." Ethan's hands are small against the leather, but he mimics Mark's position perfectly. The boy's focus is intense, familiar. Mark sees himself in that furrowed brow, that determination to master every detail. His phone vibrates against his hip. Probably Julia, with another urgent update about Richard's machinations at the office. But for once, Mark lets it ring. The sun is setting over Manhattan's skyline, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink that no corner office can match. They practice until darkness threatens, Ethan's throws becoming more accurate with each attempt. It's a small victory, meaningless in the grand scheme of mergers and acquisitions. Yet Mark feels oddly accomplished, as if he's closed an important deal. "Time to head home, buddy." The endearment slips out naturally, surprising them both. "Your mom will worry." Ethan clutches the baseball, reluctant to let the moment end. "Can we do this again? Maybe you could help me with my math homework too?" Mom says I got your brain for numbers. The simple request hits Mark harder than any boardroom confrontation. He thinks of all the times he's dismissed similar invitations from clients, children viewing them as inefficient uses of his valuable time. Now, watching Ethan's hopeful expression, he wonders what else he's missed in his relentless pursuit of success. "I'd like that." Mark surprises himself by meaning it. "How about Thursday? I can pick you up after school." Ethan's smile illuminates the gathering dusk. They walk to where Sarah waits by the park entrance, her expression guarded but not unwelcoming. She's wearing the same perfume she wore 15 years ago, a detail that shouldn't matter but somehow does. "He's got natural talent," Mark tells her, noting how Ethan stands straighter at the praise. Though I'm sure David taught him well. Sarah's eyes soften at the acknowledgement. David believed in nurturing passion, whatever form it took, even if it meant practicing catch for hours after a 14-hour shift at the restaurant. The restaurant. Mark remembers dismissing their dream years ago when Sarah first mentioned David's ambition to open his own place. "Too risky," he declared. not bothering to hide his disdain for such a modest goal. The restaurant industry is brutal. Most fail within the first year. Now, watching Sarah gather their son's things with efficient grace, Mark sees the arrogance of his younger self. While he was building empires of glass and steel, David and Sarah were creating something real, something that mattered. How is the restaurant? The question feels inadequate, but he has to start somewhere. Sarah's hands still on Ethan's backpack. Struggling. The location's good, but after David, there are bills and the staff needs direction, and she stops, shaking her head. You don't want to hear about this. I do. Mark surprises himself again. Tell me about it, the whole plan, everything you and David wanted to create. They find a bench while Ethan practices his new throwing technique nearby. Sarah's voice grows animated as she describes their vision, a cozy neighborhood spot serving elevated comfort food where families could gather and create memories. David had spent years perfecting his recipes, blending traditional techniques with modern twists. He wanted to call it Pearls after his grandmother, Sarah says, her eyes distant. She taught him to cook when he was Ethan's age. The sign was supposed to be hand-painted with little strings of lights. She trails off, reality intruding on the dream. But now without him. Mark's mind races with calculations, property values, operating costs, profit margins. But for once, he pushes the numbers aside. What was his signature dish? Sarah's smile returns, soft and genuine. Braised short ribs with rosemary polenta. He'd start the sauce at dawn, let it simmer all day. The whole kitchen would smell like heaven. She glances at Mark. You'd have hated it, too slow, too inefficient. I was wrong. The admission costs him nothing, gains him everything. About a lot of things. The moment stretches between them, full of unspoken regrets and possibilities. Then Mark's phone buzzes again, more insistent this time. The real world intrudes, demanding his attention. Julia's text is brief but urgent. Richard pushing board vote on Chen deal. Needs immediate response. Mark's jaw tightens. He's been distracted lately, letting Richard gain ground while he sorts through his personal revelation. Time to focus, to dig deeper into the numbers that don't quite add up. I need to go. He stands, straightening his jacket. But Thursday? For Ethan's homework? Sarah nods, understanding in her eyes. He'll be waiting. Mark watches them leave, Ethan's baseball clutched tight against his chest. Something has shifted in him. A subtle realignment of priorities he's not quite ready to examine. But as he slides into his town car, directing the driver toward Thompson Davis Financial, his thoughts keep returning to Sarah's description of David's patient, passionate approach to his craft. The contrast with his own ruthless efficiency is stark. While Mark was destroying companies with surgical precision, David was building something authentic, something that brought joy to others. The irony tastes bitter in his mouth. His office is dark when he arrives, most of the staff long gone. But light spills from the conference room, where Richard Davis paces like a caged predator, phone pressed to his ear. Mark pauses in the doorway, studying his former friend. Richard's expensive suit can't quite hide the hunger in his movements, the desperate edge to his ambition. Were they always like this, Mark wonders, or did success corrupt them so gradually they never noticed? He retreats to his office, pulling up the Chen Group files. Something about Richard's push for this deal has felt wrong from the start, but Mark's been too preoccupied with Ethan to see the pattern. Now, fueled by coffee and growing suspicion, he begins to dig. Hours pass as Mark follows the money trail. Shell companies, hidden subsidiaries, careful manipulations of seemingly unrelated businesses. The picture emerging from the data makes his blood run cold. Richard hasn't just been aggressive in pursuing the Chen merger, he's been systematically destroying smaller companies in their portfolio, creating artificial pressure points to force compliance. And one of those companies. Mark's hands shake as he pulls up the file. Pearl's Restaurant Group, a modest chain of family-owned establishments. David Pearson, CEO and founder. The timing of their financial collapse aligns perfectly with Richard's careful machinations. The evidence is clear. Richard had targeted David's business deliberately, using his influence to sabotage supplier contracts and spread whispers about health code violations. The mounting pressure, the constant stress of fighting an invisible enemy, it would have taken a toll on anyone's health. David's heart attack suddenly seems less random, depotted more like the tragic culmination of Richard's ruthless strategy. And Mark, focused on quarterly profits and market share, had enabled it all. Bile rises in his throat as he remembers his own words to the board. Sometimes casualties are necessary for progress. How many David Pearsons had they destroyed in their climb to the top? How many families had they sacrificed on the altar of corporate efficiency? The revelation settles like lead in his stomach. For 15 years, he's prided himself on his strategic brilliance, his ability to see 10 moves ahead. But he never saw this coming, or worse, never wanted to see it. Mark stares at the evidence scattered across his desk, at the photo of Ethan and Sarah he's recently added to his collection. The choice before him is clear, but the consequences will be devastating. His finger hovers over the intercom. Julia? Call an emergency board meeting. First thing tomorrow. Sir? Her voice carries surprise even through the speaker. The Chen vote isn't scheduled until next week. This can't wait. Mark's voice is steel. And Julia, make sure Richard attends. He spends the night preparing, gathering irrefutable proof of Richard's machinations. As dawn breaks over Manhattan, Mark Thompson straightens his tie one last time, ready to face the moment that will either redeem or destroy him. The boardroom fills slowly, directors filing in with coffee cups and confused expressions. Richard arrives last, his characteristic smirk faltering slightly at Mark's unexpected presence at the head of the table. Gentlemen. Mark's voice cuts through the murmur of conversation. I apologize for the early hour, but there's something you need to see. He begins methodically, laying out the evidence of Richard's systematic destruction of small businesses. With each revelation, the room grows tenser. Richard's face darkens as his carefully constructed schemes unravel. This is absurd, Richard interrupts, his confidence cracking. Mark's been distracted lately, making wild accusations. Wild? Mark projects the financial records onto the screen. Like your deliberate targeting of Pearl's restaurant group? Like the systematic harassment that drove David Pearson to an early grave? The board members shift uncomfortably. Richard's smile turns predatory. Ah, yes, David Pearson. Married to your ex-girlfriend, wasn't he? The one you've been spending so much time with lately? The insinuation hangs in the air. Mark feels the board's attention shift, sees the calculation in their eyes. Richard presses his advantage. Look at him, Richard continues, voice dripping concern. Neglecting his duties, making emotional decisions. The Mark Thompson we know would never let personal matters cloud his judgment. You're right. Mark's quiet admission surprises them all. The Mark Thompson you know wouldn't care about David Pearson or any of the other lives we've destroyed. He wouldn't care that his own son lost a father figure because of our ruthless practices. The word son drops like a bomb in the elegant boardroom. Richard's eyes widen fractionally. He hadn't known. None of them had. Mark has clearly lost perspective. Richard recovers smoothly. I move that he take a mandatory leave of absence effective immediately. For his own good, of course. The vote is quick, decisive. Mark watches his carefully built reputation crumble as hands raise in support of Richard's motion. His victory over David Pearson has made him bold, confident in his ability to manipulate the board. But as Mark gathers his papers, preparing to leave the empire he helped build, he feels oddly light. The weight of 15 years of compromise lifts from his shoulders. Mark. Richard catches him at the elevator, voice low. This isn't personal. You taught me yourself, business is business. Mark studies his former partner, seeing him clearly for the first time. No, Richard. You taught me something far more valuable. He steps into the elevator, watching Richard's reflection fragment in the mirrored walls. You taught me what I never want to become. The doors close on Richard's stunned expression. Mark Thompson descends from his glass tower, leaving behind the world he once ruled. His phone buzzes. A text from Sarah reminding him of Thursday's homework session with Ethan. For the first time in his adult life, Mark Thompson smiles at the prospect of a meeting that won't make him any money at all. Mark Thompson stares at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of Sarah's Queen's apartment, barely recognizing the man looking back at him. His Brioni suit hangs in the closet, replaced by a wrinkled dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves. 3 days of stubble shadows his jaw. Dark circles rim his eyes, testament to nights spent poring over financial records instead of closing deals. Dad! We're going to be late. Ethan's voice carries through the door, still strange and wonderful in Mark's ears. The word dad feels like a gift he hasn't earned. Coming, buddy. Mark splashes water on his face, the gesture more habit than necessity. In the kitchen, Sarah moves with practiced efficiency, packing Ethan's lunch while simultaneously checking her phone for messages from potential restaurant investors. There's coffee if you want it, she says without looking up. Though I warn you, it's not your usual Italian roast. Mark pours himself a cup, the ceramic mug a far cry from his usual handcrafted porcelain. The coffee is bitter and perfect. I like it better, he says, surprising himself with the truth of it. Ethan bounces on his toes by the door, backpack already strapped on. His gray eyes, Mark's eyes, shine with impatience. Dad, you promised to help with my science project before school. So I did. Mark grabs his keys to a modest sedan now, the Bentley sold along with most of his other luxuries. The proceeds went into a trust for Ethan and seed money for Sarah's restaurant, decisions that would have been unthinkable a month ago. The drive to Ethan's school takes them past small businesses opening for the day, family-owned delis, repair shops, the kind of places Mark once viewed as irrelevant to his world of high finance. Now he sees the dreams behind each storefront, the lives his and Richard's deals carelessly displaced. Tell me about the project again, Mark says, glancing at Ethan in the rearview mirror. It's about simple machines. Ethan launches into an explanation of levers and pulleys, his enthusiasm infectious. Mark finds himself smiling, remembering his own childhood fascination with how things work, before success became measured solely in dollar signs and market share. They arrive early enough to set up Ethan's display in the classroom. Mark helps position the makeshift crane they built together, marveling at how natural it feels to be here, doing this ordinary thing that matters so much. Mr. Thompson? Ethan's teacher approaches, her smile warm but cautious. It's nice to see you getting involved. The words carry a gentle rebuke that Mark accepts without defense. I'm learning, he says simply. Back at Sarah's apartment, Mark finds her surrounded by restaurant plans and budget spreadsheets. She looks up as he enters, her expression a mix of determination and exhaustion. The realtor called, she says. That space on Austin Street, the owner's willing to negotiate. Mark studies the location photos spread across the table. The storefront needs work, but the bones are good. More importantly, it's the kind of neighborhood spot David always dreamed of. Intimate, welcoming, a place where food and community intersect. Let me look at the numbers again. Mark pulls up a chair, falling naturally into analysis mode. But instead of searching for ways to maximize profit, he finds himself considering how to preserve David's vision while making it sustainable. Sarah watches him work, her eyes softening. You're different with the numbers now, she observes. Less? Ruthless? Mark supplies with a wry smile. I was going to say rigid. You're seeing possibilities instead of just bottom lines. The observation strikes closer to home than she probably intends. Mark's phone buzzes, another message from his investigator about Richard's past dealings. He's been tracking a pattern, connecting dots that paint an increasingly disturbing picture. Sarah. Mark sets down his pen, choosing his words carefully. I need to tell you something about David's heart attack. She stills, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. What about it? I've been looking into Richard's history, the deals he pushed through, the businesses he targeted. Mark pulls out a folder he's been building, evidence gathered piece by painful piece. David's restaurant wasn't just collateral damage. Richard deliberately engineered its failure. Sarah's face drains of color. What are you saying? The loan terms, the health code violations, the supplier issues, it was all orchestrated. Richard has a pattern of identifying promising small businesses and systematically destroying them to benefit larger acquisitions. Mark's voice roughens. David's death, the stress of trying to save the restaurant. Stop. Sarah pushes back from the table, her chair scraping against linoleum. I need a minute. Mark watches her pace the small kitchen, seeing echoes of his own rage when he first uncovered the truth. He'd enabled Richard's methods for years, telling himself it was just business, just the cost of staying on top. Now the cost has a face, a name, a grieving family. What are you going to do? Sarah finally asks, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Take him down. Mark meets her gaze. But I need you to understand what that means. Richard won't go quietly. He'll try to destroy everything I have left, my reputation, my relationships, my future. Our future, Sarah corrects quietly. Ethan's future, too. The inclusion catches him off guard, warming something in his chest he thought long frozen. Yes, he agrees, which is why I need to know if you're ready for what's coming. Richard fights dirty. Sarah's laugh holds no humor. Dirtier than orchestrating my husband's death, than robbing my son of his stepfather. Point taken. Mark stands, drawn to comfort her, but unsure of his welcome. I want to protect you both. The time for protection was 15 years. Sarah's words sting, but her expression softens. But maybe this is about something else now, something more important than protection. Justice, Mark says, the word feeling right on his tongue. Sarah nods. Justice. For David. For all the others Richard has hurt. She moves closer, close enough that Mark can smell her shampoo. Something simple and clean, so different from the designer fragrances that used to surround him. But Mark, make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, not just guilt or revenge. I'm doing it because it's right, Mark says, realizing as he speaks that it's true, because I need to be someone Ethan can be proud of. The moment stretches between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then Sarah's phone chimes, the realtor again, and reality reasserts itself. I should get these numbers to the bank, Sarah says, gathering her papers. And you have another meeting with your investigator? Mark checks his watch. In an hour. We're close to something big, a money trail that could prove Richard's entire pattern of predatory practices. Be careful, Sarah warns. Richard has a lot to lose. Mark thinks of his old office, his empire of glass and steel, all the trappings of success he once thought essential. So did I, he says quietly, but I'm starting to understand what really matters. The words hang in the air as he leaves, carrying with them the weight of transformation and the promise of redemption. Mark Thompson built his first life on the principle that success requires sacrifice. Now he's building a second one on the understanding that some things should never be sacrificed at all. His phone buzzes again as he reaches his car. It's Julia, his former assistant, reaching out despite the risk to her own position. Mr. Thompson, you need to see this. Richard's been talking to the press. Mark's jaw tightens as he pulls up the article. The headline hits like a physical blow. Wall Street Titans Midlife Crisis, Affairs, Abandonment, and the Death of Thompson Davis Financial. Richard's influence drips from every carefully crafted paragraph. Insinuations about Mark's relationship with Sarah, concerns about his fitness as a father, quotes from anonymous sources questioning his mental stability. It's a masterpiece of character assassination, designed to discredit anything Mark might reveal about Richard's dealings. But as Mark reads, something unexpected happens. Instead of the familiar surge of rage and defensiveness, he feels almost calm. The words that would once have devastated him now seem hollow, products of the same toxic world he's trying to escape. He clicks off his phone, starting the car with steady hands. Richard still thinks they're playing the old game, where reputation is everything, and the appearance of power matters more than its responsible use. But Mark's playing a different game now, one where winning means more than personal triumph. The investigator's office is in a shabby building far from Wall Street's gleaming towers. Mark takes the stairs, his Italian leather shoes echoing in the stairwell. Each step carries him further from the man he was, closer to the man he needs to become. For Ethan, for Sarah, for David's memory, for himself. The game is changing, and this time, Mark Thompson intends to play by rules worth teaching his son. The investigator's cramped office smells of stale coffee and determination. Photos and documents cover every surface, a spider's web of connections leading back to Richard Davis. Mark recognizes faces in the photos, small business owners, former competitors, people whose lives intersected with Richard's ambition and came away broken. It's all here, the investigator says, sliding a thick folder across the desk. Account transfers, shell companies, manufactured health code violations. Davis has been systematically destroying small businesses for years. And I found something else. He taps a particular document. Look familiar? Mark's breath catches. It's a memo from 15 years ago bearing his own signature. The first deal he and Richard worked together, the foundation of their empire. He'd never looked too closely at the casualties. His phone vibrates. Another news alert. The stories about him are spreading, gaining traction in both financial and social media. Richard's narrative is taking hold. Mark Thompson, unstable and obsessed, pursuing a vendetta against his former partner while carrying on an affair with his dead employee's wife. Mark's jaw tightens as he scrolls through the comments. The business world is turning against him, former allies distancing themselves. Even his remaining contacts at Thompson Davis are going silent, unwilling to risk association with his apparent downfall. The drive back to Queens takes longer than usual, traffic conspiring to give him too much time with his thoughts. By the time he reaches Sarah's apartment, the sun is setting, casting long shadows across the modest neighborhood. He finds Sarah in tears, her phone clutched in her hand. "They're calling Ethan's school," she says before he can speak. "Reporters asking questions about you, about us, about David." Her voice breaks. "They're saying we caused his death, Mark, that the stress of our affair—" She can't continue. Mark's hands curl into fists. He expected Richard's attacks on him, but this level of cruelty catches him off guard. "I'll handle it," he promises, reaching for her. Sarah steps back, wiping her eyes. "How? You can't fight Richard's money or his influence. And now—" She gestures helplessly at her phone. Ethan's teacher suggested he stay home tomorrow, to avoid the attention. "What did Ethan say?" "He asked if we were bad people." Sarah's words hit Mark like physical blows. If that's why everyone was saying mean things about us. Mark sinks onto the couch, the weight of consequences pressing down on him. He's faced business crises before, corporate wars and hostile takeovers, but nothing prepared him for the sight of Sarah's tears or the thought of his son questioning his own worth because of Mark's choices. "Maybe," Sarah's voice is barely audible, "maybe we should leave. Start fresh somewhere else, somewhere Ethan can just be a normal kid." The suggestion terrifies Mark more than any financial threat. "Sarah, please. Running won't solve anything. Richard will just—" "What about Ethan?" Sarah cuts him off. "All this fighting, all this drama. He's already lost one father. I won't let him be collateral damage in your war with Richard." The word choice isn't accidental. Mark thinks of all the times he and Richard justified their actions with that same phrase. Collateral damage. The cost of doing business. Now the cost has a face. And it's his son's. "I'll drop the investigation," Mark offers desperately. "Tell Richard he wins. Whatever it takes to—" "No." The voice from the hallway startles them both. Ethan stands in his pajamas, gray eyes serious in his young face. "Dad, you can't let the bad guy win." Mark's throat tightens. "Buddy, it's complicated. Sometimes—" "No, it's not." Ethan moves closer, his certainty absolute in the way only children can be. "You told me bullies win when good people give up. You said we have to stand up for what's right." Mark remembers the conversation, a week ago after Ethan came home upset about a classmate being picked on. They'd talked about courage and doing the right thing, even when it's hard. He hadn't realized how closely his son was listening. "I did say that," Mark acknowledges softly, "so we can't give up." Ethan climbs onto the couch between them. "Mom says Mr. Richard hurt a lot of people, that he made Mr. David sick." His lower lip trembles slightly. "I miss Mr. David, but I don't want you to go away too." Sarah makes a small sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Oh, honey." She pulls Ethan close, meeting Mark's eyes over their son's head. "Your dad's not going anywhere, right?" The question carries weight beyond the immediate moment. Mark looks at them. This family he never knew he needed, this second chance he never thought he deserved. The path forward is clear, even if it's not easy. "Right," he says firmly. "We face this together, all of us." Later that night, after Ethan is asleep, Mark returns to the financial records. But this time, something is different. The numbers tell a clearer story, patterns emerging that he missed before. His years of corporate strategy combined with his new perspective, showing him exactly how Richard constructed his web of destruction. And, more importantly, how to tear it down. The evidence is there in the money trails, hidden in plain sight. Richard's hubris made him sloppy. He never expected anyone to look too closely, to care about the small businesses he destroyed. But Mark sees it all now. The systematic targeting of vulnerable companies, the manufactured crises, the precise calculation of human suffering. His phone lights up with a text from Julia. Board meeting moved up. Tomorrow morning. Richard's calling for a final vote. Mark glances at his watch, nearly midnight. The vote that could seal Richard's victory or expose his crimes is hours away. But for the first time since this crisis began, Mark feels truly prepared. Because Ethan is right, it's not complicated at all. Sometimes the simplest truths come from the purest hearts. And Mark Thompson's son has reminded him that doing the right thing isn't about winning or losing. It's about being someone worth believing in. Mark Thompson's fingers hover over the stack of documents spread across his home office desk. In the pale glow of his desk lamp, each page represents another piece of evidence against Richard Davis, another nail in the coffin of their shared empire. His eyes burn from hours of double-checking figures, cross-referencing dates, verifying testimonies. The digital clock on his desk blinks 3:17 a.m. He reaches for his coffee, finds the cup empty. Again, the house creaks around him, its silence broken only by the soft whir of his laptop fan and the occasional rustle of paper. His tie hangs loose around his neck, his usually immaculate shirt wrinkled from too many hours in the same position. "You should get some sleep." Sarah's voice startles him. She stands in the doorway, wrapped in one of his old Harvard Business School sweatshirts, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her face. Even exhausted, she carries herself with the quiet dignity that first drew him to her all those years ago. "Can't." Mark gestures at the papers before him. "Board meetings in 6 hours. Everything has to be perfect." Sarah crosses the room, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. She picks up one of the documents, a bank statement showing suspicious transfers between Richard's personal accounts and a shell company in the Cayman Islands. "It is perfect," she says softly. "You've triple-checked everything. The evidence is irrefutable." Mark leans back, rubbing his eyes beneath his designer frames. "Richard's smart. He'll have contingencies, ways to spin this. He always does. But this time, you're smarter." Sarah sets the paper down and perches on the edge of his desk. "This time you're fighting for something more important than market share." Her presence grounds him, provides clarity he never knew he needed. The past 3 months feel like a fever dream. Discovering Ethan's existence, uncovering Richard's role in David's death, watching his carefully constructed world crumble and reshape itself into something unexpected but infinitely more valuable. "I could lose everything," he says, voicing the fear that's been gnawing at him since he decided to take this path. "The company, the reputation I've spent 20 years building." "Things," Sarah interrupts. "You could lose things, but you've already gained everything that matters." As if on cue, a floorboard creaks in the hallway. They both turn to find Ethan standing there in his Spider-Man pajamas, clutching the worn paperback he's been reading obsessively since Mark bought it for him last week. "Hey, buddy?" Mark's voice softens automatically. "What are you doing up?" Ethan shuffles into the office, his gray eyes, Mark's eyes, serious beneath his tousled hair. "Couldn't sleep. Are you still working on the bad man stuff?" Mark exchanges a glance with Sarah. They've been careful about what they tell Ethan regarding tomorrow's meeting, but kids have an uncanny way of understanding more than adults intend. "Come here. Come here." Mark pushes back from his desk, and Ethan climbs into his lap without hesitation. The casual trust in the gesture still amazes him. "Yeah, I'm working on the bad man stuff, but you don't need to worry about that." Ethan leans against his chest, opening his book. "I'm not worried. You're going to win because you're the good guy now. That's how stories work." The simple certainty in his son's voice hits Mark harder than any boardroom confrontation ever has. He wraps an arm around Ethan, breathing in the scent of kid shampoo and clean pajamas, and for the first time all night, the knot in his stomach begins to loosen. Sarah watches them with soft eyes, and Mark recognizes the expression. It's the same look she used to give him before ambition and greed twisted him into someone unrecognizable. Before he chose power over love, success over family. "Want me to read to you?" Mark asks, reaching for the book. "Just one chapter." Ethan nods eagerly, and Mark begins to read. The familiar words wash over him, a story about courage and redemption, about choosing right over easy. As Ethan's breathing gradually steadies into sleep, Mark realizes that whatever happens tomorrow, he's already won the only battle that truly matters. Sarah helps him carry Ethan back to bed, tucking him in with the practiced ease of a mother who's done this countless times alone. When they return to the office, she starts gathering the scattered documents into neat piles. "I'll help you organize these for tomorrow," she says. "But first, you need at least a few hours of sleep." Mark wants to argue, but exhaustion weights his limbs. What if he stops, struggling to articulate the fear that's been haunting him? What if I'm not strong enough? What if I let you down again? Sarah pauses in her organizing, fixing him with a look that sees straight through his carefully maintained facade. The Mark Thompson I knew 15 years ago would never have asked that question. He was too certain of his own infallibility. She steps closer, resting a hand on his cheek. "The fact that you're afraid of failing us, that's how I know you won't." The touch of her hand anchors him, reminds him of all the reasons he's chosen this path. Tomorrow, he'll walk into that boardroom and tear down the empire he spent his life building. He'll expose Richard's crimes, admit his own complicity, and accept whatever consequences follow. But right now, in this quiet moment with Sarah's hand on his cheek and their son sleeping peacefully down the hall, Mark Thompson finally understands what true wealth feels like. The Thompson Davis financial boardroom hasn't changed, but Mark sees it differently now. The mahogany table still gleams like wet ink. The floor-to-ceiling windows still frame Manhattan's skyline like an artist's masterpiece. But the power that once hummed through this room, the intoxicating sense of control and dominance, feels hollow now, a cheap substitute for what really matters. Richard Davis sits at the head of the table, rakish and confident in his Tom Ford suit. He's talking about quarterly projections and market penetration rate, his voice carrying that familiar note of smug assurance. The board members nod along, their faces carefully neutral as Richard outlines his vision for the company's future. Mark studies his former partner, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Richard's smile doesn't quite reach his eyes, his gestures a fraction too rehearsed. He's a man playing a part, just as Mark played it for so many years. "Which brings us to the vote," Richard concludes, spreading his hands in a gesture of false modesty. "I think we can all agree that recent distractions have made it clear that new leadership is needed. The Chen merger." "Actually," Mark interrupts, his voice cutting through the boardroom like a blade, "I'd like to discuss the Chen merger in detail." He reaches for the folder before him, the one containing months of meticulous investigation, particularly the role it played in the death of David Martinez. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. Richard's smile freezes, a barely perceptible tick appearing at the corner of his mouth. "I don't see how an unfortunate heart attack is relevant to today's proceedings." "Don't you?" Mark opens the folder, laying out documents with practiced precision, "because I have evidence suggesting that David Martinez's death was anything but unfortunate. In fact, it was the direct result of a systematic campaign of financial warfare orchestrated by this company. By you, Richard." Murmurs ripple through the board members. Richard's smile vanishes entirely. "These are serious allegations, Mark. I hope you can substantiate them." "Oh, I can." Mark's voice remains steady as he begins laying out the evidence. Bank statements appear on the projection screen, followed by emails, contracts, and testimony from former employees. For the past 5 years, Thompson Davis Financial has been deliberately targeting small businesses for hostile takeover, not for profit, for sport. Richard starts to speak, but Mark presses on. "The pattern is clear. Identify vulnerable businesses, particularly those with personal meaning to potential rivals. Apply pressure through seemingly unrelated shell companies. Force them into increasingly desperate financial positions until they either sell at a loss or..." He pauses, letting the implication hang in the air, "until the stress literally kills them." The board members lean forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to growing concern as Mark methodically builds his case. He shows them the money trail linking Richard to the shell companies that harassed David's restaurant. He presents testimony from other business owners who suffered similar fates. With each revelation, Richard's composed facade cracks a little more. "This is absurd," Richard finally sputters. Mark is clearly suffering some kind of breakdown. His judgment has been compromised ever since. "Ever since I discovered my son?" Mark's voice carries an edge sharp enough to draw blood. "Ever since I learned that while I was helping you destroy people's lives, I missed my chance to be a father?" "You're right, Richard," My judgment was compromised, but not in the way you think. He turns to address the board directly. I've spent 20 years helping build this company into a financial powerhouse. I've justified every ruthless decision, every moral compromise by pointing to our success. But success built on destruction isn't success at all. It's just sophisticated thuggery. Richard surges to his feet. This is ridiculous. We're running a business, not a charity. If some people can't handle the pressure, people like David Martinez? Mark's question cuts through Richard's bluster. A man who built his business from nothing, who treated his employees like family, who stepped up to raise another man's child when that man was too blind with ambition to do it himself? He meets Richard's gaze steadily. Was he just too weak to handle the pressure? The boardroom falls silent. Mark can see the moment Richard realizes he's lost. It shows in the slight widening of his eyes, the unconscious step backward. I am hereby tendering my resignation as CEO of Thompson Davis Financial, Mark announces, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. But before I go, I want to ensure that every person this company has wronged receives full restitution. I've prepared detailed documentation of all affected businesses, along with recommendations for compensation. He places a thick binder on the table. I'm also turning over evidence of criminal financial misconduct to the SEC and the District Attorney's Office. I expect full cooperation from the board in making this right. Richard lunges for the binder, but 2 board members beat him to it. Others are already on their phones, presumably calling legal counsel. The carefully orchestrated power structure that Richard built is crumbling before his eyes. You're finished, Richard snarls at Mark. You'll never work in this industry again. Mark straightens his tie, a habit from countless boardroom battles, and feels a smile touch his lips. You know what, Richard? For the first time in 20 years, I don't care. He gathers his remaining documents, tucking them into his briefcase with deliberate care. The boardroom erupts in controlled chaos behind him. Raised voices, hurried phone calls, the sound of Richard attempting to salvage what remains of his empire. But Mark Thompson doesn't look back. His steps are steady as he walks out of the office that has been his second home for 2 decades. Julia rises from her desk, concern evident in her expression. Mr. Thompson, it's just Mark now, he corrects gently. And Julia, thank you for everything. The executive elevator responds to his thumbprint one last time, carrying him down toward the lobby. As Manhattan's skyline slides past the glass walls, Mark feels lighter with each passing floor. By the time he reaches the ground level, his smile is genuine. Sarah and Ethan wait for him in the lobby, looking small and precious against the backdrop of marble and steel. Ethan clutches his book in one hand and Sarah's fingers in the other, both watching the elevator banks with matching expressions of concern. Daddy! Ethan breaks into a run as soon as he spots Mark, and the word still sends a jolt through Mark's chest. He catches his son in a hug, breathing in the simple comfort of this moment. How did it go? Sarah asks softly when he straightens. Mark looks around the lobby, at the security guards who no longer work for him, at the elegant architecture that once seemed so important, at the life he's chosen to leave behind. It went exactly as it needed to, he says, and takes her hand. Together, they walk out of Thompson Davis Financial for the last time. Mark doesn't look back at his name on the building. He doesn't need to. Everything that matters is right here, holding his hands and walking toward whatever comes next. The year that follows passes in a blur of change and growth. Mark learns that fatherhood can't be mastered like market analysis or hostile takeovers. It requires patience, flexibility, and a willingness to look foolish that his former self would have abhorred. But watching Ethan's face light up when they successfully launch a model rocket or helping him sound out difficult words in his beloved books brings a satisfaction that no business deal ever matched. Sarah's restaurant takes shape in a historic brownstone not far from their old neighborhood. They name it David's Place, and Mark throws himself into the renovation with unexpected enthusiasm. He learns about load-bearing walls and health department regulations, about commercial kitchen equipment and wine pairings. More importantly, he learns to listen to Sarah's vision, to the contractor's expertise, to the community's needs. The grand opening draws a modest but appreciative crowd. Mark works the door while Sarah orchestrates the kitchen. both of them wearing matching aprons emblazoned with the restaurant's logo. Ethan proudly shows guests to their tables, chattering about his mother's special recipes and his father's wine recommendations with equal enthusiasm. Late that night, after the last customer leaves and Ethan falls asleep in a booth, Mark finds Sarah in the kitchen. She stands at the prep station, exhausted but glowing with satisfaction. "David would have loved this," she says softly, running her hand along the smooth stainless steel. "He always said a restaurant should feel like coming home." Mark steps behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He was right, about a lot of things. Sarah turns in his embrace, studying his face with those knowing eyes. "You're different now. You know that, right? Better different or worse different. Just different." She traces the lines around his eyes, newer, deeper than before, but born of laughter now instead of stress. More you. Mark thinks about the man he used to be, about the emptiness he mistook for success. "I wish I could thank him," he says quietly, "for taking care of you both when I couldn't, for showing Ethan what a father should be." Sarah's eyes fill with tears, but her smile remains steady. "Then honor him by being the man he knew you could become." They kiss in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the beginnings of their new life together. Outside, Manhattan hums with its usual energy, but in here, time seems to stop. The months roll by, bringing changes both subtle and profound. Mark's testimony helps bring Richard to justice, though the legal proceedings drag on. The restitution fund he established helps dozens of small businesses recover and grow. He finds unexpected fulfillment in mentoring young entrepreneurs, teaching them to succeed without sacrificing their humanity. Ethan starts first grade, and Mark discovers the unique terror of parent-teacher conferences. He coaches Little League despite knowing nothing about baseball, learning alongside his son and the other kids. Their team doesn't win many games, but the pizza parties afterward feel like victory celebrations anyway. Sarah's restaurant thrives, becoming a neighborhood institution. She experiments with the menu, blending traditional recipes with modern twists, while Mark handles the business side with a gentler touch than his younger self could have imagined. They work well together, their strengths complementing each other in ways that make both of them better. The wedding is a small affair, held in the restaurant on a sunny spring morning. They've cleared the dining room, replacing the usual tables with simple chairs. Fairy lights twinkle overhead, and the morning sun streams through the windows, painting everything in soft gold. Ethan takes his role as ring bearer seriously, practicing his walk down the aisle for weeks. He wears a miniature version of Mark's suit, his usual paperback traded for a small pillow bearing their rings. The sight of him standing tall and proud beside Mark at the altar brings tears to more than a few eyes. Sarah walks down the aisle alone, radiant in a simple white dress that makes Mark's heart stop. She carries a bouquet of wildflowers, and her smile outshines the morning sun. As she joins him at the altar, Mark is struck by the journey that brought them here. The mistakes and second chances, the pain and healing, the love that never quite died. Their vows are simple but profound. Mark's voice catches as he promises to cherish not just Sarah, but the family they've built together. He speaks of redemption and second chances, of learning what truly matters. When he mentions David's role in shaping the man he's become, there isn't a dry eye in the room. Sarah's vows blend past and present, acknowledging the painful road that led them here, while celebrating the future they're choosing together. She speaks of forgiveness and growth, of watching Mark transform from the ambitious young man she once loved into the caring father and partner he's become. Ethan bounces on his toes as he presents the rings, beaming with pride when he doesn't drop them. As Mark slides the band onto Sarah's finger, he realizes his hands are steady. There's none of the nervous energy that characterized his biggest business deals. This feels right, inevitable, like coming home after a very long journey. The reception flows naturally into lunch service, regulars mingling with wedding guests as the restaurant comes alive around them. Mark works the room in a way that would have impressed his former board members, but his attention keeps drifting back to Sarah and Ethan, his family. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration winds down, Mark finds a quiet moment with Sarah at the bar. She's kicked off her heels, and her hair has escaped its elegant updo, but she's never looked more beautiful. Happy? she asks, leaning into his side. Mark watches Ethan charming the kitchen staff into extra desserts, his authentic joy so different from the calculated networking Mark once practiced. At nearby tables, their guests share stories and laughter, transforming the restaurant into exactly what David always envisioned, a place where people feel at home. More than I knew was possible, Mark answers honestly. He turns to face Sarah, taking both her hands in his. Thank you for giving me another chance, for showing me what I almost lost. Sarah squeezes his hands. Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be. They share a quiet kiss, interrupted by Ethan tugging at Mark's sleeve. Dad, Chef Marco says I can help make the special dessert for tomorrow. Mark scoops him up, marveling at how natural it feels now. Is that right? And what's the special dessert? As Ethan launches into an elaborate description involving chocolate and what sounds like entirely too many sprinkles, Mark catches Sarah's eye over their son's head. She watches them with a soft smile, and Mark sees their future stretching out before them. More family dinners and bedtime stories, little league games and parent-teacher conferences, challenges and triumphs faced together. The sun sets over Manhattan, painting the restaurant's windows in shades of gold and rose. Outside, the city pulses with its usual frenetic energy, but in here, time moves at a gentler pace. Mark Thompson, once defined by his pursuit of power and control, has found something far more valuable. Second chances, he realizes, come in many forms. Sometimes they arrive in unexpected packages, a nervous email from an ex-girlfriend, a small boy with familiar eyes, a restaurant that holds the legacy of a better man. The trick is recognizing them when they appear, and having the courage to embrace the change they bring. As the evening deepens into night, Mark holds his new wife close and watches their son charm the remaining guests. The restaurant buzzes with quiet conversation and gentle laughter, the kind of warmth David always said was worth more than any profit margin. In a quiet corner, a framed photo of David watches over the proceedings. Mark catches Sarah glancing at it occasionally, her smile softening with memory. They've kept his presence alive in 100 small ways. His favorite recipes on the menu, his old knife roll mounted in the kitchen, his philosophy of treating every customer like family. Ethan tugs at Mark's sleeve again, this time clutching a small notebook. Can I show you something? He opens it to reveal careful drawings of the restaurant's layout, with notes about potential improvements scribbled in his uneven handwriting. I was thinking maybe we could add more tables over here, and maybe a special place for kids to read while their parents eat. Mark studies the drawings, recognizing the same blend of creativity and practical thinking that made David such a natural restaurateur. These are excellent ideas, buddy. Why don't we talk about them at tomorrow's staff meeting? Sarah joins them, slipping her arm around Mark's waist. Just like his dad, she murmurs, always planning improvements. Which one? Mark asks softly. Both of them. She rests her head on his shoulder. David gave him the heart for this business. You're giving him the tools to make his dreams real. He needs both. Mark thinks about the man he used to be, who saw every interaction as a transaction and measured success in dollar signs and market share. That version of himself could never have imagined finding fulfillment in a family restaurant, in teaching his son about profit margins and customer service, while never forgetting that people matter more than numbers. The future stretches out before them, full of possibilities he never dared to imagine in his old life. There will be challenges. The restaurant industry is unforgiving, and raising a child requires a different kind of strength than closing deals. But Mark Thompson has learned that true success isn't built on destroying others, but on building something meaningful together. David's legacy lives on in every meal served, every customer greeted like family, every moment Ethan spends learning to balance ambition with compassion. And Mark's redemption continues with each day he chooses love over power, family over empire, substance over appearance. Ready to head home? Sarah asks as the last guests begin to leave. Mark looks around at his family, at Sarah's quiet strength, at Ethan's boundless potential, at the life they're building together in this space that honors the past while embracing the future. I am, he says, and means it with every fiber of his being. This time, he's ready to embrace every moment. Thank you so much for watching and listening to our story. Your time and support mean the world to us. If this video resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Your engagement helps us grow and continue sharing meaningful stories. See you in the next video.